Hi, everybody. This is Georgia Musgrave, and I'm here to host today's Recruiter Table Talk. I always love it when we come around to this time. And today's topic today, we're going to be dealing with how to deal with difficult hiring managers. I'm sure we've all been there. I was a hiring manager at one time and a recruiter. So there's two sides to the coin, obviously. And interesting, what illustrates this even more is I happen to be at a executive conference recently where they surveyed hiring leaders. And those hiring leaders said that 65% of them did not, that what they were basically unsatisfied with the work that their recruiters were doing on their behalf to support them. And I thought, well, that was interesting. And that coupled with the recent survey that was conducted by ICIMS, Higher Expectation Institute, said that 61% of hiring managers are feeling as if recruiters are low to moderately understanding the positions they're recruiting for. So that's not good. That doesn't build a lot of confidence in the institution of recruiting, right? And so today's table talk is really to address how do we build a better rapport with those hiring managers? How can we get them to understand that we have skin in the game too, and that we've got a level of expertise that needs to shine and to support them even stronger in the future, especially going into 2024. So today is all about building credibility. Whether you're a hiring manager or you're a recruiter, how do we build your credibility? How do you work smarter as a recruiter to save money and time in the process? And then, of course, that developing that competitive edge in developing a rapport with your hiring manager. These are all the conversations, tips we're going to be sharing with you today. And we have esteemed panelists like we always do. Three wonderful people will be joining us today. One is Kristen Posen, the other Sharon Grace, and of course, Colleen Neese. I'm sure you're familiar with these three wonderful individuals, all from Duffy Group, and of course, with their own expertise and background in recruiting for the last 20 some years. So I'll be looking forward to what they have to say, and I'm sure you are too. In addition to that, I want to just share that if you're interested in the book, Recruitment Redefined, there will be a QR code. I think it's being shown right now, as a matter of fact, on the screen. So all you need to do is click on that, sign up for that book, and you'll be receiving that book for free. This book offers a new approach to recruiting and is sure to enlighten you on new ways to recruit and approaches it for your next search. So definitely take that down, sign up for the book, and we'll be sending that out to you very shortly. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Kristen. Kristen, your background as a corporate recruiter suggests obviously you've worked with many hiring managers, different departments along the way, but even more importantly, you've probably coached a number of recruiters on how to build that rapport and develop tips to a sure-proof recruiting process. So tell me, this topic must resonate with you because you signed up to talk about it. Tell us more.
It does, Georgia. Thank you so much. And gosh, those survey results make me kind of sad that there's recruiters out there that just aren't connecting with their hiring leaders. I think whether it's in corporate recruiting or our executive search that we do here at Duffy Group, we do come across hiring leaders who do seem very indecisive. They want to switch gears mid-search. And I think that disconnect might be causing some of that problem. I'm sure there's, things on the other side too, where maybe recruiters just aren't given enough bandwidth to be able to perform their jobs. They're just order takers essentially, right? But when it comes to hiring leaders who are indecisive, I have some tips to kind of overcome those obstacles. Really it's about clarifying expectations up front. So what we do at Duffy Group is we definitely establish a timeline from the beginning. We do an intake call, we record that call, we document it, we share it with our client, so everyone's all on the same page. I think that's super important. Being curious, asking questions. What went wrong? What went right the last time that recruiter or that HR department hired for this particular leader or this department? Does a leader anticipate any pitfalls in this search? Maybe there's things that you really need to worry about, whether it's make sure you don't go to our competitor XYZ because then we're going to get in trouble with them. We've agreed not to compete on that platform. Um, and then pulling together all the right information. Job description, obviously, that's a no-brainer. Making sure it's compliant, making sure it's checking all the boxes. But what are the compensation expectations that that hiring leader has? Maybe you need to pull a salary survey for them to realign those expectations. Um, Building strong relationships, obviously that's the core of all of this. So understanding the
Mm,
working style of that particular hiring leader, what their preferences or concerns. Maybe a coworker of yours has already worked with that person before, kind of getting a heads up on how that works.
mm,
Um, Couple other things, communication. We set up a regular communication with our hiring leaders. Every week we send them a status report, and that lets them know exactly where we are in the search. And then certainly we can set up another phone call in addition to that, or when there's an issue that comes up. We always recommend picking up the phone and talking. Communicating by email sometimes just is not effective. The wrong message comes through when they read it on their side, especially when things might be going sideways on a search. So, I think that's super important. Um, just a couple more things to add. When you are putting together all the information, whether it's the resumes, the interview feedback, you want to make sure that you're presenting it to your hiring leader apples to apples. So whether it's an interview, we call it a profile, but an interview answer report, make sure that you're asking the same questions of every candidate so they're really comparing them apples to apples, and it makes it easier to move that process along. Obviously, highlighting the candidate fit, um, making sure they have plenty of options to choose from in terms of candidates, offer training and support. These are all really critical factors in putting together that rapport, helping those indecisive leaders or leaders kind of change their mind midway through the process. And
mhm.
then just always having the patience and persistence to just move the process forward because it can be exhausting at times.
I love that. I love the fact that apples to apples tip. That's really interesting. And the value of picking up the phone, right? We forget in this world that, email's great, but picking up the phone is really how you build a great rapport, if not in person. But, you spoke a little bit about timeline, and I just want to ask you a little bit more about that. How, what tips can you provide of establishing a realistic timeline to move the decision making process forward in deciding
Yeah,
on candidates? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it'll be unique to each organization. But for example, here at Duffy, we let our clients know that we will send you candidates in real time. So once we have them vetted out, we feel like they fit what we discussed in the intake call. We'll send them over right away. But a realistic expectation is to see them in like the first 10 to 15
Mhm.
business days. And then we ask, once you receive that information, please get back to us and give us feedback on those candidates within 3 business days. This way, we can keep the candidate engaged and really move the process along.
Got it. Okay. And then what about some strategies in seeking feedback? Like if you're not hearing from the hiring manager on how do you get hiring managers to be more talkative? How do you get back in and seek feedback from them on the process? Do you have any tips on that?
Well, yeah, I think feedback in general is super important. Like I know at Amazon, they send their candidates a survey as soon as they complete their first interview. And that's whether the person's moving on or not. And so they're finding out right away, is the recruiter doing what they're supposed to be doing in the interview process? But I think surveys are super useful with all 3 parties, right? So the recruiter, the candidate, and the hiring leader, to whether it's at the end of the search, midway through, just to find out how it's going. Because if you don't check in on those things, that could explain why the 61% are unhappy, right? So
It's so true. It's so true. And now, Sharon, again, similar. You've been at this for a long time. You work with many hiring managers, different positions, and they all have different expectations, different personalities. Does this topic resonate with you as well?
It does. And I share the sentiment of Kristen's of the results of those surveys, quite surprising and and sad. Maybe, well, we know that the past couple of years, the job market's been crazy.
Mhm.
A lot of hiring needs, and a lot of recruiters were hired as well. And so lack of training, maybe a lot of in-depth training probably is a part of it. And having to come up to speed and learn quickly. It's a position where you are multitasking all day, every day, and needing to adapt as quick as possible and being very flexible and agile. So we talk about those challenging, difficult hiring managers, hiring leaders, and it's a subjective term, but let's just say we all have some challenges in our day-to-day. And let's try to reduce them, understand where they're coming from. So a couple of areas that really come up more often for me would be with the compensation, and maybe just you getting what I would call like a tall order, from a hiring leader of a long list of must-haves and wants. But what's really realistic? What's really happening in the marketplace? Can this really happen? We want to start with knowing that we are setting the stage for a successful search or a rec that you're given from the hiring leader, and they may be multiple positions. So as Kristen was alluding to, really developing that rapport and initially. So it's that relationship, and you're building trust, just like we are with our candidates. So we come across this often, these tall orders, unrealistic expectations. And again, most of it I feel is coming from the compensation side. And then I'm experiencing 2 years of experience. And those two don't always match. So you may be wanting a couple extra years of experience in this particular area, and the salary maybe not quite be there yet. Well, hiring leaders typically are working on what their budget is, and they're not as familiar as what is going on in the marketplace. And that's where that's up to us. So if we approach building this relationship with the hiring leader with a much more of a strategic and consultative recruiting partnership, that will start the process with building that trust. We're going to be gathering the information. It's the evidence that will help them see things differently and start to understand. Not until then. So how do we get there? So the more relationships that we're building now on the other end with the candidates and gathering that information and finding out what is really going on with the compensation. We know that the past couple of years, and I've talked about this before, the market's been crazy and the salaries have increased. However, the evidence that I'm seeing is that they're not increasing at the level that they were. And in most cases, they really have plateaued.
Can I jump in real quickly? Because you talk about compensation and data, and obviously that market data is critical, right? And how do you go about gathering that market data if recruiters are not as exposed to that technique or that skill set of doing that? How do you go about doing that? Can you shed the light on that, Sharon?
Yeah, it's easy. It's building that relationship and the rapport with the candidate, having those conversations. I tell the recruiters that I work with, and this is just how I've always been, is I wear what I call my career counselor hat. I genuinely have an interest in what the candidates are doing.
Mhm.
I'm interested in what they've done, what their career progression is, what their goals are. Most have a goal in mind. Understanding that you're going to now have this relationship where there's trust with the candidate and you're understanding maybe where they are currently at in compensation and what that entails and where they want to be. Locations, have some impact on that, as well as industries as well. We all know that like tech, maybe that, high might be the most, high paying. And nonprofits, depending on the size of the nonprofit, not as much, but it's really the work as well. What is the
Mhm.
candidate really looking for? Are they really more mission focused and salary is not as important as someone climbing the ladder in a particular area within the tech industry, or the accounting profession is one that I always include because of the shortage there. And they definitely are very strategic in their career approach in, where they start, where they want to be, and the skills needed in between. So I also think that part of this survey, the results, might also play into the recruiters not having an in-depth understanding of what the position is. And that might also include the industry as well. And being current with business and economic news that's out there. Maybe there are changes, tailwinds in a particular industry, and there are some and some right now. So really having that understanding, because when you're not understanding what the position really is, it's really hard to get a grasp on the recruiting, and especially when an internal recruiter is working on multiple recs at the same time.
Got it. Got it. So educating yourself is key, and building that rapport to get the trend, to get the market data you need from the candidates is key to building, if I understand it right, that rapport with the hiring manager to set the right expectations. So that's excellent. So then, Colleen, once again, you've got a plethora of experience, and we were just chatting the other day, if I recall, about a difficult hiring manager, I would say, more in the nonprofit space. But again, I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the stumbling blocks, and how do you overcome them with the variety of hiring managers you work with in the last few years?
Sure. Well, thank you, Georgia, and thank you, Kristen and Sharon, for your great insights and tips. We've all been there. All recruiters have had the experience of, the frustration of, working so hard to recruit a great candidate. You build a fantastic recruitment strategy. You go out there into the market and you do your research, you do your sourcing, you do your recruiting. You interview and assess the candidates, you submit them to the hiring leader, only for something to happen with the hiring leader to cause that candidate to not get hired. And so it's very frustrating. And there are, a number of challenges, I think, that can arise during the recruitment process that causes this to happen. And, I would say one of the biggest challenges that we face, and especially these past few years where the war for talent was just really, really tight. And one of the biggest challenges is just not moving quickly enough on a candidate. And what I mean by that is, you submit a candidate to your hiring leader, and, the days of just taking your time to invite them in for an interview are over. You really do need to move quickly on that. For passive candidates, well, let me start with active candidates. With active candidates, those who are actively looking for opportunities, they oftentimes have multiple interviews, multiple opportunities. And so if a hiring leader doesn't move and get that candidate in for an interview, you're going to certainly lose them to another offer. But with passive candidates, those that you've worked so hard to get their attention to look at this opportunity and consider something outside of their current employer. If the hiring leader just doesn't move quickly to bring that candidate in, then that candidate really isn't motivated to leave their current employer, and it gives them a negative impression. So you really want to move quickly, and by move quickly, I mean, like what Kristen referenced, within 2 to 3 business days, get that interview scheduled. But I would say another challenge that recruiters run into is that sometimes the interview process is just crazy and unrealistic. For example, if there are, 15 people that the candidate needs to meet with, having that candidate drive into the location 15 separate times is absolutely unrealistic. They can't take that time off work, and just a number of reasons of why that's a problem. So you've got to really look at your hiring process, your interview process, and put together panel interviews that make sense. Also, I think it's important to be aware and conscious of who you're including in your interview process. I have found that, we all know sometimes when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it can be a crazy process. And so think about streamlining that. For example, there are some staff members that the candidate meets with that really that could be more part of the onboarding process, doesn't necessarily need to be part of the interview process. So again, just really making that interview process seamless and something that can be realistically accomplished. But I would say the worst offense of all is when the hiring manager blows the interview. And those situations, I think, are pretty rare. I'm very lucky. I think all of us are very lucky to work with some really amazing hiring managers for the most part. But there are those situations where a hiring manager will come into an interview just really unprepared. It makes it obvious to the candidate that this is the first time they're looking at their resume. They aren't asking thoughtful questions. There are those times where a hiring manager does all of the talking. I've debriefed with candidates before to ask about the interview, and they said, well, they didn't ask me any questions. They just talked the whole time. Things like that. I actually had a client one time that purposefully treated employees awfully, really poorly during the interview process. And they were doing that purposefully because they know that they have demanding hiring managers. And so they thought that approach would help weed out candidates who couldn't work well with challenging leaders. And I think that approach really blew up in their face because all of the candidates would withdraw after being treated so poorly during the interview process. So don't try that. But I think there's a lot of ways to address this. You got to be prepared. I think we as recruiters can really help our hiring leaders, do their part during the interview process by even giving them interview guides, helping them prepare for those interviews. Certainly making sure that they have all the information on the candidate. And as my colleagues have said, just that communication is key and that relationship building is key.
I love it. And I was going to ask you this question, but I think you've answered it already, is how, when a hiring manager does blow the interview in the same way that this one did before. I can't believe that person did that. I mean, it obviously worked. You said it backfired, but it did exactly what he wanted it to do, I suppose. But needless to say, how does a recruiter go back in after preparing their hiring managers? How do they go back in and say, you blew it? I mean, you didn't set yourself up well. I mean, how can a recruiter give a hiring manager that kind of feedback? Should they have the ability to do it? And if so, tell me how it's done.
I mean, with that particular example that I shared, what I did do is I created some behavioral interview type of questions that person could use. Instead of treating them poorly during the interview and actually having that be like an experiment, we utilized proper interview questions that could really pull out examples and experiences that demonstrated that the candidate had what they were looking for. And so, yeah, they were, open to that feedback. I think part of it is developing a relationship with your hiring leader. And all of us know that, the best searches are the ones where our hiring leaders are responsive, they give detailed feedback, they're engaged in the process, and when we have that type of partnership, it typically results in a great hire and a pretty seamless process.
Absolutely. And now, Sharon, didn't you tell me you had a flip side of it? You have a hiring manager that's just super strong recently.
Yes, exactly. So
Counter of the two.
speaking of being, engaged, this is a very much a type A, full of energy, extremely positive person, and engaged, very fast paced, very hands on, and extremely decisive. So that most recruiters aren't used to this because we don't hear anything for a little while. But when you're sending an email and then immediately getting feedback, and immediately ready to schedule interviews right after reading the resumes and profiles, this is a good one. So the flip side is we needed to make sure we're on top of it too. So we're not the ones delaying, and so needless to say.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. I could see smiles on everyone's face, like, oh, those are the type of people we love working with. So that's great. That's great. So I guess at this point, let's turn it to the audience. Let's see what questions they have. Okay, we've got a question here. Let's see who we want. Okay, so my boss requires multiple interviews and behavioral assessments. How can I convince them to utilize a more streamlined process? So it sounds like this person's got a lot of obstacles going on. Who would like to take this particular question?
Well, I'm happy to add some thoughts there, especially as it relates to the behavioral assessments. I have found that there is the right time in the process to introduce those types of assessments. For example, I think when you are earlier in the process and you are asking candidates to fill out those assessments, especially passive candidates who are fully employed and very busy, I think it's best to have those assessments be done after you've at least had an initial interview. And that's at least my opinion. I think everybody does have a different approach to this. But I have found that those situations where our clients are asking us to, have 5 candidates take behavioral assessments, we do get pushback from the candidates. They are much more likely to be willing to take those assessments if they've at least met the client and know that they are a viable candidate in the process. So I tend to recommend that step taking place, more like between first round and second round, instead of doing it on the front side where that's just is pretty cumbersome.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same. Yeah, same. Have it at least have a phone interview with them and explain to them why you think this is so critical, this assessment, to the culture in your company. Yeah.
And things like asking them to, fill out applications and things like that. And, just kind of having to jump through those hoops. Sometimes it's our job to let the client know, that those are too many steps, that we are at risk of losing our candidates. It really, I think, depends on the position and the market and the timing and things like that. But we just, you just want to be able to show your boss the value of streamlining a process, and how that can, really outweigh having so many steps where you're going to risk losing good people.
Nice. Okay, another question. Oh, this is good. I am a new corporate recruiter and just formed relationships with 6 hiring managers. What should my first steps be to earn their trust and respect? Interesting. That's a big one. I think we touched on some of those topics today, credibility and building credibility, but how would you answer this?
I'll take that one for sure. I think a lot of it is just, meeting one-on-one with those hiring leaders. If that's not possible in person, do it on Zoom. Take them out to lunch. Really try to get to know them. um, understand what's happened in the past so that you are prepared to kind of understand what their expectations are, what they've had to deal with in the past, and then just share what you can contribute to make the process better going forward.
Yeah, I love it. Anything else do people want to add? No, we're good. Okay, awesome. Well, I think that rounds out today's table talk. I think this was fabulous. I took down a lot of notes myself, and I just want to thank the audience that participated in today's session. As you can see, if you want to click on this QR code, you'll get a copy of the recruitment research book here, Recruitment Redefined, and a Revolutionizing Recruitment. There you go. Sometimes I get the two mixed up, but we've got the title here and the book. Again, great tips for what you're looking for if you are approaching your next search. Give you some great insight there. My takeaway today from is that hiring managers all have preferences. They come with their own background, their own understanding of what they're looking for. And without recruiters that can stabilize and understand, build the rapport, and take their expertise and build that credibility based on the tips we shared today, you should be in a really good spot. So again, I want to thank you for today's session. And I want you all to know, write everyone's names down: Kristen Posen, Colleen Neese, Sharon Grace, look them up. These are great resources for you down the road. Link in with Duffy Group, please, and follow us. We've got a lot of great conversations happening on social media, and we want you to be a part of it. So again, thank you for your time today and your effort. We'll see you again next year. And everyone, happy holiday and have a great new year. This is the last Recruiter Table Talk of the year. So thanks for being a part of it.